Over the past few months, we've seen a re-evaluation of statues, prompted by the Black Lives Matter movement. Their association with a potentially racist past has made many statues the target of a lot of outrage, leading to some being destroyed. We wanted to find out why statues get put up, what they represent, and their importance, or lack thereof, to contemporary society.
The statues often no longer really represent socially or culturally the individuals that they actually formally embody. In the case of, say, statues of Captain Cook in Australia, for example, those statues are kind of symbolically loaded, so that when people debate whether there should be new statues of Captain Cook or whether old statues should be removed, those debates are really about what symbolically they represent and whether they capture the kinds of things we want to celebrate in contemporary Australia or in the case of Confederate statues in the contemporary United States. I don't think the fact that statues being toppled and that there are calls for their replacement is really anything new or anything terribly surprising. So the ancient Romans, when there was a new emperor, would often topple statues of predecessors, certainly if they were from a different dynasty. The ancient Egyptians famously erased all imagery of Queen Hatshepsut in the 2nd millennium BC. History is traditionally written by the winners, and as different social groups acquire power and acquire a voice, they then re-inspect their history, and societies reconfigure their history over time. The costs of that process for Indigenous people, about the injustices of settlement, about the victims of the establishment of modern states, and obviously that's been sparked particularly in recent times by the Black Lives Matter movement that's been reinvigorated after the death of George Floyd.
The shape of contemporary public sculpture and commemorative sculpture is shaped by two things. Trends in art, they're more conceptual, evocative, abstract than representational. And the second is there's much more concern these days about a more diverse and inclusive narrative of history. So they don't want to hang it on one image or one person. 19th century public statues were all about affirmation. Great man, great queen, great king. Whereas now I think they're much more about challenge. What is our history? What are our values? If you go back to the 19th century in Australian history, there was a real mania for statues, and they usually were men of empire, men of the military, men of industry and commerce. So the notion of literally putting someone on a pedestal and saying that was a great person, their values are to be admired and emulated. There's not a lot of that goes on in public art commissioning now. They're very much about more abstract values.
States and communities represent these ideas about our past and justify our present structures, and that's where things like statues and monuments come in, because they're fundamental to the ways in which communities and countries tell stories about their past in order to shape their present. I think that these stories about the past are always undergoing transformations, and that involves, building new statues and monuments, celebrating different things, which obviously is really important to Australia and Australians now, but also rethinking this and telling different stories about the statues that are there. So I guess although I think, things like Captain Cook monuments are problematic in lots of ways, I don't think that they necessarily just tell the one story. They can be made or framed in ways that recognise the history of the past in a more complicated way.